Someone decided each of these cities needed to disappear. They sent armies, dropped bombs, bulldozed entire neighborhoods, and wrote the names off the maps, and every single one of these cities looked back, got up, and refused. This is not a video about destruction, it is a video about what comes after, about the moment a city decides it is not finished, when people return to rubble and start building again with nothing but memory and stubbornness. Today we visit 15 cities that were targeted, bombed, leveled, or deliberately erased, and every single one of them is still standing. We move from the most famous to the most forgotten, and the last city on this list is the one nobody told you about, a city that made the most unexpected choice of all when it was erased. Stay until the end, it is worth it. Subscribe now. City Pulse covers a new city every single week. City 1, Hiroshima, Japan. On August 6, 1945, a single bomb erased the center of Hiroshima in less than a second, nearly 80,000 people gone in a moment that rewrote what a weapon could do to a city. 3 days after the bomb fell, streetcars were already running again, not completely, not everywhere, but enough to show what Hiroshima had already decided about its future. The city preserved the skeleton of the one building that survived near the epicenter, leaving it exactly as the blast left it, a permanent and unambiguous reminder of what nuclear weapons do to human beings. Today Hiroshima is a city of over 1 million people, river parks, peace museums, and ordinary daily life. The contrast between what happened there and what exists there now is one of the most powerful arguments for human resilience any city in the world has to offer. City 2, Warsaw, Poland. Warsaw was not just bombed, it was deliberately, building by building, erased from the surface of the earth. After the 1944 uprising, Hitler issued an explicit order to destroy the city completely. Nazi units moved through the rubble with flamethrowers and demolition charges, destroying structure after structure with no military purpose, only the intention that the Polish capital would never exist again. The Nazis kept detailed records of Warsaw's architecture before destroying it, and Poland used those records to do something that had never been attempted in history before. They rebuilt the entire city from the documentation of its destroyers. The rebuilt Old Town of Warsaw is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, not because it is ancient, but because of what it represents, the most deliberate act of rebuilding a city's memory ever undertaken. City 3, Dresden, Germany. Dresden was known as the Florence of the Elbe, a city of Baroque palaces and one of Europe's most beautiful skylines, and in February 1945, bombers reduced most of it to ash in 4 nights. Under East German communist rule after the war, the ruins were largely left untouched. The Frauenkirche, the great Baroque church at the heart of the city, sat as a numbered pile of stones for nearly 50 years, its reconstruction repeatedly rejected by a government that preferred the wound visible. Then German reunification happened in 1990. And Dresden had the conversation it had been postponing for half a century. The Frauenkirche was rebuilt stone by stone and reopened in 2005, 60 years after its destruction. The darkened original stones visible among lighter new ones make the building's history readable in its own walls. City 4, Mostar, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Mostar had a bridge that stood for 427 years, a single white limestone arch built by Ottoman architects in 1566 that had survived earthquakes, floods, and 2 world wars. On November 9, 1993, Croatian forces deliberately targeted it with tank and artillery fire until it fell into the river below. The Stari Most was not a military target, it had no strategic value, it was a symbol, and destroying it sent a deliberate message about erasing a shared identity. After the war, divers retrieved the original stones from the riverbed. The bridge was rebuilt using the same white limestone and the same Ottoman techniques, and in 2004 the Stari Most rose again over the Neretva. Young men jump from it today as they have done for centuries, and the act of jumping from a bridge rebuilt from its own ruins carries a weight the original never had. City 5, Grozny, Russia. In 1999, the United Nations described Grozny as the most destroyed city on Earth. 2 Chechen wars had turned the capital of the Chechen Republic into a landscape of rubble so complete that international observers reached for comparisons to Hiroshima. Virtually every major structure was gone, the population had fled, and most observers believed recovery would take generations. What followed was unlike anything on this list. Within a decade, Grozny had been transformed into a city of glass towers, luxury hotels, wide boulevards, and one of the largest mosques in Europe. The speed of the reconstruction was so extreme that photographs from before and after look like 2 completely different cities in 2 completely different countries. Whether that transformation represents recovery or a different kind of erasure is a question Chechens themselves answer differently depending on who you ask. City 6, Rotterdam, the Netherlands. Rotterdam made a choice that almost no destroyed city has made before or since. Instead of rebuilding what was there, it built something that had never existed anywhere. On May 14, 1940, the German Luftwaffe firebombed Rotterdam's medieval center in under 15 minutes and destroyed 6 centuries of architecture in a single morning. The city faced the question every destroyed city faces and answered differently from most. Rotterdam chose the future. Architects were given permission to build boldly with no reference to what had existed before, and the result was a skyline of progressive experimental architecture with no equivalent in any other European city. The cube houses, the market hall, the Erasmus Bridge, a city that looks like it was designed by people who were told there were no rules. Because that is exactly what happened. City 7, Coventry, England. The morning after the Luftwaffe bombed Coventry in November 1940, the cathedral's provost did something that would define the city's identity for the rest of the century. He had 2 words written in charcoal on the wall behind the ruined altar, not "Father forgive them," but simply "Father forgive," a deliberate choice that made the prayer universal rather than directed at an enemy. The ruins of the old cathedral were preserved exactly as the bombs left them. A new cathedral was built directly beside them, connected by a porch that visitors cross, going from destruction to reconstruction in a single step. It is one of the most honest architectural statements about war and forgiveness that exists anywhere in the world. Coventry later twinned with Dresden, with Stalingrad, and with Warsaw, cities that understood each other's wounds in ways that required no translation. City 8, Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Sarajevo holds a record no city wants. It was under siege for 1,425 days, the longest siege of a capital city in modern warfare. For nearly 4 years, the city's population lived under constant sniper fire from the surrounding hills. Citizens were shot crossing roads, in their homes, at market stalls. The beautiful hills that framed the city were where death was positioned and waiting. Today Sarajevo's streets are repaired and its facades restored, but the Sarajevo roses are still there, resin-filled craters from shell impacts in the pavement, painted red across the city as memorials to civilians who died at each location. You walk over them without knowing until someone points them out, and then you cannot stop seeing them. City 9, Beirut, Lebanon. Beirut was called the Paris of the Middle East before 15 years of civil war turned entire neighborhoods to rubble and drew a battle line called the Green Line through the center of the city. The post-war reconstruction was ambitious and controversial. The historic downtown was replaced with a sanitized upscale district that many Beirutis felt bore little resemblance to the city they had lost. And before the city fully processed any of that, on August 4, 2020, an explosion at the port killed over 200 people and destroyed or damaged entire sections of the city that had survived the civil war. Beirut is still recovering from both wounds simultaneously. The reconstruction is incomplete, the politics remain complex, but the restaurants are open, the music is playing, and the people who stayed are still building something, because building something is the only option that ever worked. City 10, Hue, Vietnam. Hue was the imperial capital of Vietnam for a century and a half and home to a royal city modeled on the Forbidden City in Beijing, with palaces, temples, and ceremonial halls enclosed within kilometers of ancient walls. During the Tet Offensive of 1968, North Vietnamese forces held Hue for 25 days. The battle to retake it involved house-to-house fighting and direct artillery fire on structures that had stood for generations. What 25 days of combat did to things that had taken centuries to build is something the numbers alone cannot fully describe. The restoration of the imperial city has been ongoing since the end of the war and continues today. Visitors walk through a complex that is simultaneously restored, partially ruined, and still being reclaimed. The mixture of what was saved, what was rebuilt, and what remains as rubble is itself a record of what happened here, and no guidebook is needed to read it. City 11, Seoul, South Korea. Seoul was captured and recaptured 4 times during the Korean War. Each change of control brought destruction from both sides, and by the armistice in 1953 the city was barely recognizable. What Seoul became in the following decades is one of the most extraordinary urban transformations in modern history, from rubble in 1953 to one of the largest and most technologically advanced cities on Earth, a global center of technology, food, fashion, and entertainment. The speed of the reconstruction was so complete that the city looks almost nothing like it did before the war. The past survives mainly in a handful of royal palaces surrounded by a metropolis that replaced itself so thoroughly it sometimes feels like a city with no memory at all. Seoul is the clearest example on this list of a city that was erased and replaced with something entirely new, and the question of whether that new thing is better than what was lost is still being debated. City 12, Volgograd, Russia. It was not always called Volgograd. the world knew it as Stalingrad, and the battle fought there between 1942 and 1943 was one of the largest and bloodiest in recorded human history, killing or wounding somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million people on both sides. The fighting was so intense that survival in certain parts of the city was measured in hours rather than days. Individual buildings became tactical positions that changed hands repeatedly in combat that reduced them to bare load-bearing skeletons. The city was rebuilt and renamed Volgograd in 1961. On the hill that was the most contested ground during the battle, the Soviet Union erected one of the largest statues in the world, the Motherland Calls, a concrete figure 85 meters tall visible for miles across the flat steppe. Construction projects in Volgograd still regularly uncover remains and unexploded ordnance from the battle. The war did not end when the guns stopped, it only became archaeology. City 13, Manila, Philippines. Almost nobody outside the Philippines knows this. The Battle of Manila in 1945 produced one of the worst urban destructions of the Second World War and the highest civilian casualties of any battle in the Pacific Theater. As American forces advanced to liberate the city, Japanese commanders ordered defense to the last. The resulting month of street-by-street combat killed over 100,000 Filipino civilians caught between both sides. Only Warsaw among world capitals suffered greater destruction during the entire war. The historic walled city of Intramuros, built by Spanish colonists in the 16th century, was almost entirely destroyed, 400 years of colonial architecture gone in weeks. Manila rebuilt rapidly but practically rather than historically, and the 100,000 civilians who died in that battle remain among the least acknowledged mass casualties of the Second World War, a story the world still has not fully told. City 14, Berlin, Germany. Berlin did not just lose the war as Germany's capital, it was divided as a form of punishment, a city used as a laboratory for two competing visions of what the future should look like. By the end of the war, around 80% of the city center had been destroyed, and then the division came, a border running through the middle of the city separating families and neighborhoods, made permanent and lethal by the wall built in 1961. The fall of the wall in 1989 reunited two cities that had spent 40 years becoming strangers to each other, and the reunification of Berlin as a single urban space was one of the great planning challenges of the late 20th century. Today the line where the wall stood is marked by a double row of cobblestones embedded in the pavement running through the city for miles. You can follow it across streets and parks and empty lots, and it is the most honest memorial any divided city has built for itself, a line in the ground that says simply, "Here is where we were cut in half." City 15, Oradour-sur-Glane, France. And here is the city that made the most unexpected choice of all. Oradour-sur-Glane was a quiet farming village in France with no military significance and no connection to the resistance. On June 10, 1944, 4 days after D-Day, a Waffen-SS unit entered the village, assembled the entire population, separated the men from the women and children, and killed everyone, 642 people in a single afternoon. The village was then burned to the ground. After the liberation, the French government made a decision that sets Oradour-sur-Glane apart from every other city on this list. They decided not to rebuild it. The ruins were left exactly as they were on June 10, 1944. The burned cars still sit in the streets, the sewing machines still stand in the ruins of the dressmakers' shops, the children's toys and kitchen implements still rust under the French sky, untouched for over 70 years. A new village was built nearby for the survivors, but the old one was declared a national memorial and preserved forever in its state of destruction. It is the only city on this list that chose not to come back, and in that choice, it remembered everything. 15 cities, 15 different answers to the same question: what do you do when someone tries to erase you? The world tried to erase these places, and these places wrote back. That is what City Pulse is here for, one city at a time, every single week. We will see you in the next one.